This text is rough for a lot of reasons. But I think about the Canaanite woman. And I want us to try and put ourselves in her position, whether you've had a spouse or a kid or a parent, brother or sister or best friend who's suffering from some crippling, debilitating illness. Cancer or rheumatoid arthritis or something that has been unexpected and turned their world upside down. We've talked and prayed for our family friends, Christy and Matt and their son, Alex, 4 years old. They were on a family vacation, and what they first thought was just a clumsiness of a toddler turns into something, this isn't right, turns into, what are you saying? Blastoma, brain cancer, spreads to spine. Where do we go? What doctors do we need to see? And you shift, if you've been in that place, you shift from initial concern and worry to, all right, mama, papa, bear, or friend, or family member, who do I have to see to get help? Where do we need to do? What steps, what appointments, what tests do we have to run? And those of you who have been here who know that tenacity of fight, and also in the same breath, that feeling of impotent powerlessness. When you watch a person you love, and you're desperate to fix it, but you don't know how. And sometimes you feel very small and very insignificant in the face of what they're facing. That's where the Canaanite woman is in this moment. Have mercy on me, son of David. Have mercy. My daughter is hurting, and I know you can help her. She uses son of David. She's not Jewish, but she knows who he is. I'm going to speak your language. And she keeps shouting, Jesus, do you see me? Over here. And in an unusual outlier, a Sunday school lesson we don't receive about Jesus. You know, we got stained glass windows, Jesus got open hands, people are all gathered around. He gives her the Heisman. He ghosts her, pretends she's not there. Eventually, the disciples get tired of her annoying prattling. Can you just send this woman away? She's making us uncomfortable. She's a nuisance. Can't we just get her out of sight, out of mind, so we don't have to think about what she's saying? And Jesus, Jesus is Jesus, right? He's going to welcome this woman in. No, not so fast. He tells her, I've only come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Basically, he says to this woman, my office is closed to you. You don't qualify for my help. You're not one of my kin. You're not part of my tribe. This is Jesus talking. I can't think of another biblical text where Jesus is so standoffish and puts somebody at arm's length. This is the same Jesus, right, that healed the centurion servant, the Italian cohort, enemy centurion, Gentile, the Gentile Gerasene demoniac who's running around naked in the tombs and nobody goes near him because everybody's terrified of him. That Jesus, who's embracing lepers and touching them, the untouchables, the woman at the well. There's room for all of them at the table, but not this woman. She doesn't make the cut. What's going on here? Is this our Jesus that we read about in the Gospels? Sure doesn't seem like the Jesus that we encounter in the rest of the Gospels. So she presses further. She comes and kneels before him. Lord, my daughter, in case you couldn't see me over on the hill, I need your help. And I've heard lots of pastors, I've heard lots of sermons on this, try to soften this up. You know, I hear Jesus he knew she was going to be faithful, and he's just testing her, right? After all, Jesus knows how we're going to respond. Son of God, right? He knows. So they take this uncomfortable depiction of Jesus off the table. And he didn't really mean it when he says to her, it's not right to take the food from the children's place at the table and give it to the dogs like you. They say, well, he didn't really call her a mutt. It was a pet, a little dog. It was a kinder, gentler form. Listen, if I go home and I tell my wife, listen, Robin, you look like a dog today. That's not a good idea. And that's a lighthearted version, a joking version. I mean, at what level of belittling, humiliation, and degradation? Imagine being this woman and a doctor or nurse comes up to you and it's your kid who's sick, or your mom and dad, or your spouse, partner. I'm sorry, but we don't serve the likes of you here. Go home. Wow. That's Jesus talking in this text. Unfamiliar territory, is it not? I've also heard explanations like maybe Jesus was having a bad day. Like in those Snickers commercials where a person's like a celebrity, in a grumpy mood, and then they're like, here, have a Snickers, because nobody can take you right now in this moment. They bite into Snickers, and then suddenly they're their normal selves. Maybe he's just hangry. Jim Sommerfeld, who's a peer, contemporary pastor, a Baptist pastor, said, in Mark's gospel, it says that Jesus and the disciples go to Tyre and Sidon, same as Matthew, but it says, and by the way, this is Gentile territory, so it's west of Israel, and it says they go to a house, and Jesus tells them to shut the door, lock the door, put down the shades, don't tell anybody I'm here. And his extrapolation of the text is, maybe Jesus, after feeding the multitudes and healing people, is just tired. Got to get away. Maybe he's on holiday, and he's hiding out. Don't tell anybody where I'm at. And here she comes, because she sniffs out that he's in town. I just need to see Jesus. Yeah, he's tired. You don't understand. It's an emergency. He told us not to let anybody in. I don't care. Get him. It's possible. It's possible. But before we get to these kind of extrapolations of what could be in between the lines of the text, let's think about what's there and the actual barriers that Jesus puts up. You're not in my tribe. You're not of the house of Israel. And I can't give to the dogs what is sacred. And before we pile on, I want to ask us both individually and as a church to think about how we might also put those barriers or stipulations about who can be helped, who is included. Have you ever been in your car or walking and somebody's held up a sign, I'm hungry, or they're walking by your car and others, and you pull one of these, there's got to be something I left over in the car seat here somewhere, or there's a phone call, I got a text here, or when is that light going to change, and I'm not going to make eye contact. Nobody here has done that, right? That line of discomfort. Somebody's in desperate need, or at least says they are, trying to discern, do I help? Can I help? What is the situation? Churches do this too. I'm sorry, you're not a member. We can't marry you. We can't have your memorial because you're not part of this community. You can't take communion with us because you're not in our denomination and don't understand it the same way we do. Well, yeah, but we've never talked about it. It doesn't matter. Yes, the treatment for your husband exists, but your insurance doesn't cover it. I'm sorry, ma'am, it says here on your application that you've been convicted of a felony. Yeah, but that was 10 years ago. I paid my time. I've gone through my parole. I've kept a clean record. You don't understand. It's our policy. We can't rent or hire to anybody who's been convicted of a felony. We can't give taxpayer dollars to feed and shelter these undocumented folks coming across the border. I mean, they're not citizens. We have these layers of conversation about where compassion begins and where it ends all the time. And the Canaanite woman in this text pushes Jesus and anybody who would follow him to say, where does the line of God's compassion end? Is there a limit to who God is compassionate to, Jesus? To who is compassionate? Community of faith? If we jump back into this story, Jesus has just gotten done calling her a dog, and she swallows her pride and continues to press on. She could have said, the heck with you. You're being a jerk to me. How dare you say that to me? I can't believe you'd say that to me. And instead, she says, yes, Master. I know who you are. But even dogs like me sit and wait for scraps from the table of the children. She's not going to take his deterrence of humiliation or remarks. Again, this is Jesus painted in a very dark light in this text. This Canaanite unnamed woman is the protagonist and hero of this story. And I'd go even further, because in Matthew's community, Mark and Matthew tell this story a little bit differently. They use different language for the woman. Maybe Mark calls her Syrophoenician. Matthew calls her Canaanite. A linkage to the history of enmity between the people of Israel and the people of Canaan. Remember the story. God promises the land. But there's some people already there. Those Canaanites. And be careful, because they'll pollute you spiritually. They will be a bane to your husbands and sons if you intermarry with them. You must destroy them, eradicate them, kick them out. A divine mandate to genocide. Is it more true that God said, I don't like those Canaanites, to remove them? Or is there a possibility that the Jewish people said, God's promised us this land, but inconveniently there's some people there that we don't really like, and in turn, God must not like the people we don't like. So let's go get them in God's name. Possible. Uncomfortable. As this region is outside of the norm, I can't help but think about this woman saying, yes, Lord, but even the scraps. And what is this text bookcase shelved around in two bookends? The feeding of the multitude of 4,000 and the feeding of the multitude of 5,000. Right in between is the Canaanite woman. And what do we hear at the end of both those texts? There's vast multitude of men, women, and children. We only count the men who were fed, but there's more. And in each case, baskets of loaves and fishes are divided, and there's enough for everybody, and what? There's scraps left over. Same word. Are there scraps for me? This Canaanite woman says. I understand everybody else got fed, but I'm not like the rest of you. Is there a place for me at this table? As I think about this text and Who's allowed? Who is a part of God's compassionate reign? I think about the behavior and the way that this text depicts Jesus and the limits or limitlessness of God's compassion, of understanding of Jesus, who we normally think of as impartial, dignity to all, expanding God's welcome, healing and restoration. Not saying, no, I've only come for these folks. I think about signs in the antebellum South, whites only, or black folks got to step to the back. I think about women can't hold office or speak in this church, even though we say that God moves through all people. Forget being here if you're mentally or physically disabled, gay or trans, black or Hispanic. You fill in the blank, because we do all the time. And I think this text is more included in this gospel because Matthew's community, this early community of Christ followers, was struggling mightily. We're Jewish Messianic people of the law of Moses, and we believe in Jesus. These Gentile folks over here, these Greeks and Romans, these Scythians, these Egyptians, they want to join us, but they're not like us. So, how are they part of the community? Are they a part of God's compassionate plan? Or is it just Israel? Is it just people that look and act and speak like us? People that have the same skin color, same orientation, same beliefs, same practices, same traditions. Yeah, they can be a part of our tribe if they keep kosher, if they get circumcised, if. And you see these two worlds colliding in the letters of Paul all the time. Read Galatians. Paul and James and the boys in Jerusalem, I'm going to minister to these Gentiles. No, you're not. This is why I want to minister to Gentiles. Yeah, it's okay. They say spies to spy on me, to see if these people were, Timothy is circumcised or not. I told him he didn't have to be circumcised. And back and forth and back. It was all just one peaceful, harmonious family, and everybody got along. John tells us that there are people that worried about associating, the blind man's parents are worried about associating with him because they're afraid they're going to get kicked out of their synagogue if they say we know Jesus. So I want to posit that this text is more about if Jesus, growing up in a Jewish family, Mary and Joseph and his family members, grew up in synagogue with some particular biases. His people, his traditions, just like any other human being. And if Jesus can be pushed to think about maybe there aren't limits to who God is compassionate to, if his notion of who he is sent to and what his mission is can change, then shouldn't the people who follow him struggle with the notion that we also put up barriers and layers of who can be helped, who's included, who matters to God, and therefore should matter or not matter to us? And so let's not take ourselves or this portrayal of Jesus off the hook. It's meant to be uncomfortable. It's meant for us to struggle and to wrestle and to hear this woman's voice in our own face. Have mercy on me. Do you see me? I need your help. I need you to hear me. Rudolf Bultmann, one of the great ministers and preachers of his time, said he thinks about prayer and the power of this woman's petitions and prayer. And he says, not all prayers are a petition to submit to the will of God, but sometimes, rather, to move God to do something that God might not otherwise do. That's the prayer of the Canaanite woman. And so when I think about this text, and it's just not the Sunday school felt board Jesus that I grew up with. Thanks be to God, because it's really an indictment a challenge to the communities of faith who would follow him. Is there a line you draw to the compassion of God? I want to share one last story with you, because this situation can be found within 1,000 yards of this church every day. A man who is a neighbor, I'll say, came up to me and said, I want to talk to you about the homeless problem and your church's involvement in it. And I want to say that, I go to such and such church, and I would hate, Pastor, I would hate for your growth and your reputation to be damaged because of your association with the homeless problem in Downers Grove. And I said, as a Christian to Christian, I would hate to think that our priority is our reputation over serving whom Jesus would call us to serve. What are we really after as a church? Now, I didn't say it quite as harshly as that, but because I understood at some level he was trying to share his discomfort and some practical worries. And there are some rational, and there's always some challenges when you deal with different vulnerable communities, sure, on preparedness and what you're able to do. However, that doesn't excuse us from the challenge to follow and to not put up barriers, and as best as we are able to see and be, therefore, the Canaanites, whoever we would label them in our world. And I'm sorry if this offends some of us, but if it's more important that we have a sparkly position in the community, a proper, dignified position, and we're leaving people out, what kind of community of faith is that? That's a country club. That's not a body of Christ.